Hello, this is Dr. Flight. I hope you're doing great. Thank you for joining me in this presentation on advertising, sales promotion, and public relations. So in this video, what we're going to do is drill down a little bit and talk some specifics in regards to different tools that are used to promote, to build awareness, or to otherwise let people know about our product or our brand. Again, these are tools that we use. Advertising is obviously a huge professional industry in and of itself. So is public relations, and then promotions are vehicles or activities we use often in conjunction with advertising and with public relations as well. These three things kind of go together very closely, and in other words, we usually do all three together simultaneously to achieve some type of a communication goal. Again, within the fourth P of the marketing mix, of the promotion P, there are a number of tools that you use to build awareness and to deliver a message. And so these are the types of things that we would choose, that we would have available to us in our media toolbox, if you will, to be able to spread message, to get word out, and to be able to give people information about our products, our brand, and also the positioning strategy that we will be using to promote our brand. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. Hope you enjoy. And again, this is advertising, sales promotion, and public relations. Thanks. Okay, so as we move forward, what we'll do is spend some time talking about each of these components of the promotional mix. First, we're going to spend some time in advertising. So advertising receives a tremendous amount of exposure and interest, of course. It's a paid form of communication that companies engage in where they have strong control over the content of the message that's being delivered. And as such, they can craft messaging and deliver specific points to the audience that they want to be known. It's generally thought of as a less personal approach compared to the other approaches of communication. However, because of the standard features that advertising offers, it can be duplicated many, many times over and be offered in a mass medium. So advertising then is a big area, and in terms of the development and the creative elements of advertisements and ads, if you will, but then also the placing of advertisements and the actual media buying process is a very, very large task, and many companies will outsource this activity to specific agencies that handle advertising and media buying activities. Some organizations will internalize the process, but keep in mind that advertising is such a unique skill set that a lot of times in creating ads and then also buying and placing media, outside firms are often used to do so. As with a lot of different messaging campaigns and approaches, there are different types of advertising. In fact, there are whole courses taught in this area, so I'm not going to be able to get a lot of material in here. But know that there's institutional advertising where an entire product category may be advertised. This could also be extended to think about a advertisement of an entire company or a family of brands or some type of advertising that covers many products simultaneously or a broad range of products that are within a specific product category. So if not, then from a broad perspective, having a brand or company advertised, firms may advertise a specific product, and thus product advertising, which would maybe suggest a specific advertisement to a specific brand or specific product or service at hand. And then there are additional forms of product advertising which focus on pioneering or maybe discerned as or using a strategy of pioneering advertising, competitive advertising, and then comparative advertising. So when you're thinking about pioneering advertising, what we want to do is focus on first-time users and the creation of primary demand for the product. So this would be initial buyers early in the product life cycle. During competitive advertising, we often think about this during the growth and maturity stages when there's competition involved and the goal is to persuade or to compare or not compare, but to contrast the current product that you're advertising to that of competitors. So obviously competitive advertising is a bit redundant in its name, but persuasion is the key. Comparative advertising is when two firms have their products in comparison with each other. And this may be effective if you're a challenging brand. You would never do this if you were the leader in the product category. And it may be counterproductive in the sense that while you're comparing your brand or product to somebody else's, you're also mentioning that somebody else in your advertisement. And generally, we don't want to give others a name or a presence in the marketplace that we're paying for. So different types of advertising then, think of them, from a broad perspective institutionally, but then also we have more focused product focused advertising done as well. So as we move forward, some other elements to think about include advertising wear out. So what we want to be concerned about is advertising a message too often or too frequently or too repetitively so that it becomes boring and doesn't have an impact anymore. We want to be careful, in terms of the reaction to our advertisements, since spending and dollar amounts are involved with each ad that we place. And so just imagine that each time we place an ad, each successive ad has less and less effect, yet we're paying the same amount of money for each ad to be aired. And so the effectiveness of our buys tends to decrease as we advertise and reach advertising wear out, or that point where we have some diminishing return on that aspect. So market share, growth, sales of that nature stop growing. They may even decline, yet we still have to continue to spend to place those ads. So again, the advertising effectiveness diminishes rapidly once we get to a wear out point. So this is something that we want to measure. We want to be able to gauge where that point is for consumers to be able to focus on. This leads us to this thing called the advertising response function, and it's a curve that measures how effective advertising is based on exposure and level of advertising that's done. So as I mentioned, market share and sales tend to stop or they slow the more advertising that we do. So each successive ad that's seen by the consumer has less and less effect. And so what we want to do is kind of be aware of how long the ad has been in the marketplace and how effective the message continues to be. Then as we move forward, while we're thinking about where the consumer is in the product life cycle or in the decision-making cycle, as long as our promotional goals are being met, that's fine, but then once we move out of a promotional goal into another one, we need to reconsider our messaging and the effects that that wear out has on our overall buying spend. So this response function may look something like this, where we have level of sales on one axis and then the volume of advertising on the other. And note that this curve is convex to begin with, but then we hit an inflection point where the effectiveness of the ad begins to it's still increasing, but it's increasing at a decreasing rate. So it's a diminishing return on incremental spending. So this response function then is something that we can measure in the marketplace, and we need to decide how much investment we want to continue to make over periods of time as this curve shifts from convex to concave in its effectiveness. So obviously sales decrease at or sales increase, but at a decreasing rate once we hit this point of inflection. Okay, so that's kind of the idea of wear out, um, not to be confused about some other key elements, key pieces of the of media buying and media placing advertisements within media, and making sure the effectiveness of our buys or our dollars is there. In media and in advertising, um, two very important metrics include reach and then frequency. So we want to be able to reach our target audience, and this is usually a volume or a number or a percentage. So we're reaching 60% of our audience or 80% of our audience, which you may recall is a figure that you would use in the ATAR model, ATAR, to represent awareness. So if we're reaching 80% of our market, then we might suggest that 80% of our market is becoming aware of our product or capable of being aware of our product. Frequency is the sheer number of exposures that a recipient has or audience member has to the message that we are delivering. So these two elements are, come together, and oftentimes we look at reach and frequency together. The more of your market you reach, and the more often you reach them has a direct impact on the cost of advertising. So this is always counterbalanced with costs that we have in terms of our budget. Another element to kind of think about as we move through this is the creation of the message that's going to motivate the consumer to make a purchase. So advertising execution talks about and is embedded in how messaging happens and how the message is communicated from a communication perspective. And it's a lot about whether we have some type of appeal that's built into our our advertising, whether we use a story, whether we use straight up facts, things of that nature kind of embed how a message is how a message is created, but how it is delivered as well. And so the creative elements then that are implied when it comes to advertising are important. Here's a slide that you can take a look at. This should be also in your textbook, but you may want to pause this here to give you an example of several different types of execution approaches. So again, some of these, as I mentioned, deal with sort of the effect that you want to have, a humor appeal, for instance, a lifestyle appeal, or some type of fantasy creation, something that embeds the story into a delivery mechanism then is really what we're thinking about when we're thinking about execution style. So again, take a look at these. Think about how different advertisements deliver a message that would be effective for the audience, for the viewer, for your market. Um, Keeping in mind that we want messages that are memorable, but also actionable, that create some type of a desired behavior within the marketplace. Moving on, one final sort of table, if you will, relating to advertising is this one. And again, feel free to pause this and think about the different mediums and mechanisms used to deliver a message in advertising. So advertising is extremely flexible in the sense that there are lots and lots and lots of different ways to get messages across in a paid medium. They can be visually affected like through television or billboards and things of that nature. It could be through print, it could be through sound, audio, like in radio. But there are a number of different ways to reach audiences from a communication perspective, and there are just hundreds of different opportunities to spend money to get that message across. So understanding the nuances, then the pros and the cons, as this chart illustrates, of different type of media play into what you want to communicate and how you want your message communicated and heard in the marketplace. So it makes sense to be able to take this information and then apply it to meet your goals and your objectives within your messaging campaign. Okay, so that talks a little bit about then the nuances of advertising. Next, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about sales promotions. So promotions, we generally think of as sales inducements or motivating, kind of elements that get consumers to buy a product either sooner or in greater quantity than they would normally do. Um, Now, promotions can actually happen anywhere within the supply chain, but oftentimes we focus mostly on the end user. But a promotion can happen between a producer and a distributor, or a manufacturer and a retailer, something along those lines as well. Sales promotions, though, are there to stimulate behavior or some type of action. Generally speaking, we want a consumer, again, to buy a product or engage in an activity sooner or more often than they normally would. Sales promotions then prompt behavior and action. One thing to remember or to know about a sales promotion or a promotion of any type is that the value that the consumer receives in the value proposition, remember the value is defined as benefits received in conjunction with the cost the consumer has to give up. But remember that within that definition of value, when we do a promotion, we're either increasing the value the customer receives or we're decreasing their cost. That's what a promotion is, and that's why it becomes valuable to the customer, because it implies or it projects a more positive value proposition to the customer, because again, we're either increasing the value of the value proposition that's being offered, or we're decreasing the cost in order to give the customer more for what they are willing to give up, more value for what the cost would be for them to incur. So that's kind of an important concept when we talk about sales promotions. But to the generally though, when we think about to consumers, which again, oftentimes we think of end users, we want our users to increase product trial, distribution. We want to boost sales. We want to get people more interested or remembering our brand, so that it'll excite the marketplace. Um, Oftentimes we use a lot of different promotions simultaneously, but we always use some other form of communication with a promotion when we do a promotion. So in other words, we'll run a promotion, but we'll also have a public relations campaign along with an advertising campaign in conjunction with the promotion. A promotion is never done on its own. Um, Keeping in mind that frequent promotions tend to have a negative impact on the perception of one's value or brand. So if you're always having a sale, always discounting your price, you're always giving the consumer an incentive to buy your product, then that diminishes the overall value of your product in the eyes of the consumer a lot of times. But keep in mind and remember that we can also have promotions within supply chains. So we have channel member promotions too. If we promote a channel member to take on more product, we sometimes refer to this as a push strategy. So when we stimulate demand within a channel of distribution, then we're getting our agents, our retailers, our distributors, our brokers to take on more product, which they then push to the customer. We can do lots of different associated activities with business partners. So allowances, point of purchase displays, contests with at the store level. Allowances suggest that we're going to give retailers maybe extra benefit if they buy more product now, like we'll reduce our price for a short time, or we'll send them more product. We'll give them 10% more product, this month if they buy from us, and things like that. Cooperative advertising is something that we do as well pretty often. Okay, so again, sales promotions then push, motivate, and stimulate demand for the product, either with the end user or with somebody within the supply chain. Lots of different, illustrations of different promotions that we can do. There are actually many, many different types of promotions that are available. Again, the purpose of this slide is really just to remind you of the different opportunities there are. You should be aware of what each of these are: product sampling, coupons, rebates, contests, premiums, things of that nature. Another slide here, loyalty programs. So those are big. We want to think about those for creating loyalty, but it may also be embedded within a promotional activity. Product placements, point of purchase displays, and so forth. Okay, so again, feel free to pause, go back to the previous slide. That's fine, of course. Make sure that you're comfortable understanding what these different types of promotions are, how they function, and what each one of them may be about. All right, so the last area that we're going to delve into at this particular point deals with public relations, and then we're going to talk a little bit about implementing and evaluating each of these areas. But public relations is an area that most firms engage in. Oftentimes, the public relations area is outside of the area of marketing. Sometimes it's in a different department or different function within the firm, because it's just different. It's a different area. It's not something where we have a dollar amount that we pay into it, but it is an expense. It is an office. When we do public relations, what we're trying to do is craft the opinion and the attitude of the market or of the public that is outside the firm. And so what we want to do is create what we think of as a systematic approach to influence these attitudes and interests that people have in us. So what we want to do is develop publicity for the firm. This is often unpaid, so it's not like an advertisement commercial. It's more like we have a story to tell and we want news reporters to give us this information or tell our story so that we can promote ourselves kind of in an unbiased way with a third party. So public relations messaging tends to be more believable and credible as opposed to advertising because it's coming from somebody else and it's somebody else's opinion that is being described in relation to our products or our brand. Lots of different elements again are embedded within the PR area or public relations department. Again, if you pause here, you might look at some of these different activities that are done. Media relations, for instance, making press or news releases, creating activities and events that create buzz and excitement about a brand. Crisis management, which we'll mention here in a second, but when something bad happens, we want to be able to manage that story and be able to walk the company through a troubling time if that happens. So news stories again, things of that nature, lobbying governments and governmental officials and things of that nature may happen as well. So lots of different activities happen, and there are a lot of different quote unquote publics that we want to message to when we think about public relations. It could be consumers, but you might also be messaging to investors and to public at large as well. So I mentioned this idea of reactive or crisis management. So as we go into public relations, it's important to know that public relations is organized, it's planned, it's developed, and it's systematic in a lot of different ways. So we want to be able to measure the impact of brands and people's image of our product and such. So all the different activities that happen within public relations are serve to do this, to gain public publicity and buzz by proactively developing a plan. So doing event sponsorships, doing the active things that put the public's eye on the firm. Being active in social causes is something that firms are doing very actively nowadays, again, in order to sort of manage the public's image of the firm. The other element, though, is when we are proactively, positively trying to shape public opinion, but there's certainly times when something bad happens that we need to be reactive and react to a negative situation to again manage public's opinion of the firm, but do so in a way that again sort of channels the story in a way that we want the public to follow. Okay, so that wraps up a little bit of public relations material. And again, there are entire university degrees in public relations. So, what we can cover here is just kind of an idea of how we want to use public relations as a messaging tool within the marketing area to get a message across and perhaps even incorporate it directly into our branding kind of strategy and how we'll brand a product. When we move forward, though, we want to be able to measure the impacts that these activities are having. And we want to ask, how do you know if your messaging program is effective? Well, we ask certain questions. We want to make sure that the receiver got the message. So if you remember the communication model, where we have a sender and a receiver, we want to make sure the receiver got the message. We want to ask if the receiver acted on our message, and we want to ask if they acted the way we wanted them to specifically. So asking these three questions really begins to uncover whether your messaging campaign has been effective, regardless of what type of tool you used, whether it was whether it was advertising through promotions or developing promotions or public relations. Each of these three have different pros and cons associated with them, and most likely you're using all three together at the same time. But at the end of the day, you want to know if this messaging was effective or not, and if your receiver actually did what we wanted them to do. So we have to have some type of measurable feedback in order to know whether things are moving properly or not. So as we talk about measuring advertising, we often run a number of tests, and we do market research to understand whether the ads that we're running will be or have been effective. So oftentimes before we run an ad and place a media, we'll choose a sample, let that sample look at the ad, and we'll measure whether that ad is effective in motivating the behavior we want to motivate. We sometimes run something called a recall test or an awareness effectiveness test. In recall testing, we want consumers to be able to look at our message and then be able to tell us what they remember and whether our ad was memorable or not. And obviously, our ad is going to be viewed with many, many other ads, and so the ability for consumers to recognize and remember elements of our ad come into play. Awareness and effectiveness tests are maybe A/B tests or pre-post tests where we ask consumers the degree to which they know about us or are aware of us. And then after a period of time when an advertisement has run, we retest and we measure how much that needle has changed, how much more they are aware of us or how much more they recognize us at this new point in time. So an pre versus post exposure, and maybe an A/B test when we're looking at people before and after hearing our message, whether they respond or not. Other ways we can measure the effectiveness of advertising and our communication plan in general is whether people are actually buying our product or not. So oftentimes with promotions, we look to see if somebody came in as a result of our promotion and made a purchase. So um, again, these are direct sales. We ran an ad or we had a promotion over a 3-week period, and we look at our increase in sales as a result of that. So we may look at a close rate, whether that was improved over a period of time, whether we had better prospects come in as a result of training experience and so forth. We also have a sales cycle that might be improved as well. So when we think about sales and measuring the effects of selling, we might tie this into some promotional elements, but certainly if we think about direct sales, door-to-door sales, or maybe a sales staff effectiveness, we might think of some of these things here. PR efforts, very, very difficult to measure the direct effects of public relations. So it's just very difficult to know whether a story in a newspaper that was written about us has a direct impact on sales or not. And over time, because these take a long period of time to implement, you may see something measured in brand equity as a result of public relations, but direct effects are extremely difficult to measure. We might start looking at how people feel or what they think sentimentally about our brand, maybe within brand personality, and based on what our PR goals are, we might see that being influenced through public relations. We could also identify how quickly we get out of a mess if we're in a crisis situation, and that might be an indication of how effective our public relations efforts are as well. So the last thing then we'll just mention is, I mentioned the idea of direct sales, but promotional effects are short-termed because promotions only last for a very short period of time, and their goal, the goal of a promotion, is to generate short-term sales. So pre-post promotional period sales, how many sales you had during a specific time, participation rates, response rates. If we had a couponing, we ask how many people maybe used the coupon during that period of time. We have the actual redemptions that are available to us there. So those are appropriate for promotional effectiveness measures. Digital media, we really haven't talked about digital media much here, but certainly views and clicks, likes, forwards, comments, page navigations, those types of things, the engagement of consumers in a digital format and their willingness to spread our name and our message is all embedded in this concept. Okay, so this video then spoke about the general idea of components that make up the marketing mix, which are advertising, promotions, and public relations. There are other elements that are traditionally in the marketing mix or in the promotional mix too, including direct sales and selling, and also digital media and social media elements as well. So non-traditional electronic is kind of a newer area that folds into this, and those will be topics for other videos. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, please let me know. Thank you.